I'm Terrell Jermaine Starr, senior reporter with The Root, and I'm here with the most Googled 2020 presidential candidate following the second Democratic debate, Marianne Williamson. How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
So some news publications have drawn comparisons between your untraditional presidential run and that of Donald Trump's, in that you both are not seasoned politicians, but you speak to the idea of America, not necessarily the nuts and bolts of how to run it. And I'm just curious as to how you would respond to such comparisons.
I think I do speak to the nuts and bolts. I think I do. And I think the most important thing, I don't think the issue is that the president lacked political experience so much as that he lacks ethics. And I don't think that he has a visceral taste for democracy. You know, politicians are not the only people who sit around and have significant conversations about America. Politicians aren't the only people who talk about the deep issues that need to be discussed. There's a little bit of a Wizard of Oz illusion here, that behind the curtain there's something going on there. Politicians have an important set of skills. I have an important set of skills, I feel, as well. I believe that we're living at a time where, in order to navigate the times in which we live and the turbulence of these times, we need more than just political mechanics. We need political vision. You know, very experienced politicians took us into Iraq. Very experienced politicians took us into Vietnam. So there's something more going on here. You could have the best car mechanic in the world, but that car mechanic, no matter how good they are, may or may not have any idea what road you should take to San Antonio. I'm talking about what road we should take to San Antonio. Do we need political mechanics to help us get the car running? Absolutely, and Washington is filled with them. But we need somebody to look at the map and know, gee, where should we be going now? And that, I believe, is born of the skill set that I have had for 35 years and developed for 35 years.
Yeah, and I think that the concern that people would have is that we really have not seen someone like you take the stage, and someone who seriously wants to take the helms of a position where you're used to people who have years of experience, whether or not they've messed it up or led us into wars, led us to Vietnam, for example. And so what are you doing to assure people that your experience is exactly what it would take to lead a country where we're used to people who have decades of experience being elected officials and running departments, et cetera?
Well, first of all, it's a legitimate question, although I would point out that there are other people running in this race about which there are no such questions, who have had, like, what, a couple of terms as a congressman? Anybody who thinks somebody's had a couple of terms in the U.S. Congress, has this wealth of political experience, doesn't know what Congress people do all day. 50% of their time is raising money. So I think people have this illusion of what they do all day. So there's a lot of that political expertise, which, while the question is valid, the president, him or herself, is not doing every little aspect of everything. The main job of the presidency, Franklin Roosevelt said that the primary aspect and role of the presidency is moral leadership. He said that the administrative function is secondary. If President Trump had wanted to surround himself with really good political experts, he could have. He's chosen not to. It's not like they don't exist in Washington. And no executive branch is run just by the president, him or herself. I think I have a very good track record of choosing very, very fine people, recognizing talent. And what I want are people who not only have the kind of political expertise that is needed, and that is legitimate, but also the kind of consciousness that is necessary to reflect the views that I want to see effectuated in my administration.
So do you think that any of this has anything to do with you being a woman?
No, of course it does. It has to do with me being a woman, but more than me being a woman is not towing the line. It's outside the box. The box is putrid. The box is insane. The box is dysfunctional. So the fact that I'm outside the box, my thought is that's the only place to be if we're really talking about a sustainable future. There are elites within elites in this country. One of the elites is what I call the political media industrial complex. It's this sense of entitlement. It's these self-appointed gatekeepers. They're going to tell the rest of us who's qualified. This is America. This is America, and it's supposed to be the voters' decision. The Constitution doesn't even mention political parties. George Washington warned us against them. So there are all these gatekeeper layers, and then they say it's long shot. Then they say it's a long shot candidacy because in the hopes that if they say it enough, then people will think, well, I like her, but she's a long shot. I mean, let's be real here. There are enough of us who know the game that we should start saying what we know.
I just want to move into another part of the conversation where people have gone through your tweets and people have made a number of accusations about you towards your views on science. And so we'll just go through some of those and you can respond to them, right? So let's start off with a tweet of yours from April 14th, 2018, in which you said children on psychotherapeutic drugs does more to cause depression than to heal it. Do you worry that the way that you talk about overprescription will negatively influence people who should be taking medication?
Well, first of all, I would have to see that exact tweet to know what those words are before I'm going to say anything about that. But the FDA has issued a black box warning that for people 25 years old and younger, antidepressants can do more to cause, can actually carry a risk of greater ideation, suicidal ideation, than less. We are living at a time where attorney generals all over the country are now indicting big pharmaceutical executives for their role in the opioid crisis. We know now that big pharmaceutical executives, absolutely knowing the addictive nature of the painkillers that they were prescribing, overmarketed, overprescribed, and overmanufactured. Now, why are we to be so naive as to think, given what we know, that in every other area they're the paragons of virtue and concern for the common good? That doesn't make sense to me. I think the predatory nature of a corporation, any corporation, big pharma or pharmaceutical companies or any others, when they are not tied to ethical and moral concerns, is a conversation, particularly in America today, that should be among all of us. Painkillers have a place, but should everybody be on painkillers? Obviously not. Do psychotherapeutic drugs, including antidepressants, have a place? Clearly they do in many people's lives. I celebrate. If somebody with serious depression is being helped, I have never judged that. I have never told anyone to get off their medication of any kind. However, or I won't even say however, I will say and. There is a spectrum of normal human despair that is not a mental illness. Somebody had a heartbreak, somebody had a divorce, somebody went bankrupt, somebody lost their job, somebody lost their mom or their dad. These are painful times. They're not a mental illness.
Right, but I think the question is if someone, here are the main concerns that people would respond to. People would say, are you a medical physician?
I understand.
The first question. And then also the idea is that people could take what you're saying as saying that for those who really need it, you are making a judgment for those who do it. That is the perception, and I think that people have not heard enough of you saying that I am okay with people who are taking drugs in these particular instances. That is the perception.
This is the issue. I don't wander outside my lane. I never would make a comment about bipolar, schizophrenia. Clearly, there are mental conditions for which psychotherapeutic drugs are reasonable, are legitimate. People are served by them, and I've always acknowledged that. When doctors, and by the way, many women get their antidepressants from their gynecologists. Gynecologists are no more mental health. They're not mental health experts. And there are many so-called mental health experts who hear somebody talk for 10 minutes, give them drugs. So all of this idea about that expertise, there are people, when you talk about somebody who's gone through a divorce or a heartbreak or the loss of a loved one, no, that's my lane. So I'm not wandering into their lane. They're wandering into my lane when you talk about normal human despair. And, you know, this, I respect whatever anybody wants to do, but this whole business about chemical depression and about it's in the brain, I'm sorry, I haven't heard anyone who's on an antidepressant tell me that they had a brain scan first or they had a blood test first. So I stand by my questioning, which I think a lot of people are questioning. Isn't it weird that everybody's on meds now? Can we just have a conversation about it? And I find a shutdown, oh, that's dangerous. I don't like what's going on in America today, that people can't say, can't say, wow, maybe we should talk about this. And notice, it's only when if I may, this is really important. The only places it happens is when there are huge multi-billion-dollar industries at play. So
Right, but these are not. But the people who are expressing these concerns aren't moneyed by multi-billion-dollar corporations. These are everyday people.
I have never told people not to take their meds, and I've never told people to get off their meds. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you something else that I've always been very clear about. If people are on antidepressants, the last thing they should do is throw them away, put them in a trash can, or throw them down the toilet. That is when it can be very dangerous, and I have always said that. So I'm not someone who glibly says, get off your med. I would never say that, have never said that, and no one can find a case of my ever having said it.
So let's go back into some passages from your book, the one that Return to Love, in which some people have taken some passages out of your book and expressed concerns. One of the passages include cancer and AIDS and other serious illnesses are physical manifestations of a psychic scream. And the other one is sickness is an illusion and does not actually exist. And the final one is AIDS, for instance, can be thought of as angels in Darth Vader suits. Here are some enlightened visualizations. Imagine AIDS virus as Darth Vader and then unzip his suit to allow an angel to emerge. And elsewhere in the book you say, does that mean that it is a mistake to take medicine? Absolutely not. But the healing doesn't come from the pill, it comes from our belief. And so what do you think of the fact that your words are now being used as a way to say that you're anti-science and anti-medicine?
I think it's ridiculous. You know, Buddha said that the world is an illusion, but Buddhists go to the doctor. Einstein said that time and space are illusions, but he was a scientist. When someone speaking from quantum physics or metaphysics or spirituality talks about the world as an illusion, quantum physicists say that of itself, that is not saying don't go to the doctor, it's not saying we don't live practical lives. And the idea of the mind-body connection, people are acting like this is some weird thing. If you are an oncologist today, the oncologist is one of the first people to say to most patients, get yourself over to one of those spiritual support groups. So the angels in Darth Vader, the idea of somebody who has cancer, let's say, or AIDS, doing visualizations with the cancer. So this has been around for decades. This is what you do in spiritual support groups. So anybody who reads that book in its entirety, nobody who reads any of my books gets the idea that I'm not a practical woman and I'm not talking about practical things. It's just not me. So the idea of my being anti-science, nothing I've ever said or done is anti-science, nothing I've ever done or said is anti-medicine. I'm a Jew, I go to the doctor. What do I say about those people? Most of them, they know what they're doing. This has nothing to do with my actual beliefs. I think when you're running for office, at least, and even though I think that kind of mischaracterization is part of the process today, what's sad about it is that I stand for many things politically, which if people want to argue with me, let's have a conversation about my actual position. There's enough to talk about. But that kind of stuff, I'm anti-science, I'm anti-medicine. It's nobody who's actually read my book, actually been to my work. I've always felt with my work, and I've been out there for a long time, people come to my lectures, they might not like it, I might not be their cup of tea, but I don't think anybody leaves thinking I'm not a decent person, fairly intelligent woman who is in the real world. That's just a picture of me. That's just not who I am.
Your stance on reparations have gained a lot of attention. And so can you tell us why you're so passionate about the subject and how you would work as president to bring forth a package that would get the support of Congress?
When I wrote a book in 1997 called Healing the Soul of America, and my work has to do with applying spiritual principle to practical issues. That's what I do. That's what I've done for 35 years. So many of the things that are big, like stage 4 cancer societal issues now, in the 90s, they were already there in stage 1. A doctor doesn't say, well, it's only stage 1 cancer, so we'll ignore it. So back in the 90s, when everybody was saying everything's so good, I was saying, well, doesn't that depend on what neighborhood you live in? Doesn't that depend on what part of the world you live in? So in 1997, I wrote a book talking about mass incarceration, wealth inequality, racial inequality. It was there. It was just that you have to have a conversation that goes beyond the surface. So the transformational principle here that applies, and all that a country is a collection of people. So whether it's a country or an individual, you can't have the future you want until you clean up the past. So whether it's a Catholic going to confession, a Jew on the day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, or an AA meeting where people have to admit the exact nature of their character defects and actually take a fearless moral inventory. I want to be a president who actually it helps this country end one chapter and begin another. And in order to do that, we have to clean up some things. And one of the things has to do with that original character defect of race. Now, the reason reparations, the reason I feel so strongly that it be reparations as opposed to just race-based policies. Race-based policies leaves open the question of whose fault it is that the gap exists to begin with. Now, therefore, it might have and would have, theoretically, economic repercussions and consequences. But reparations carry a greater power. It carries moral force. It carries psychological, emotional power. Because reparations carries within it an inherent mea culpa. It is an inherent acknowledgement by one people of a wrong that has been done, of a debt that is owed, and a willingness on the part of one people to pay it. That releases energies that go beyond. It is more genuine. It is genuinely disruptive. It goes beyond just money. And also the issue of reparations. I heard another candidate said the other day say something. She said, we can't just write checks. I thought to myself, well, actually we can, because it's the difference between justice and the accumulation of capital. So if you just have, oh, there's going to be housing, it's going to be better for you in housing, better for you, I mean, what, excuse me, power comes from the accumulation of cash. Power comes from the accumulation of capital. There's something about reparations, and many of the questions, when I hear, well, how would you do it, and who would you do it to, and is it going to be in housing, is it going to be, we have to have a study, because it'll be housing or discrimination, to me that is part of the paternalistic paradigm. That, to me, is a continuation of the colonial mentality. To me, it's like, I owe you money. If I owe you money, I don't get to tell you how to spend it. So to me, when you talk about these transformational principles, I believe the stipulation should be that the money is for purposes of educational and economic renewal. And in my plan, it is a $200 to $500 billion plan that is dispersed over 20 years to a reparations council. The Reparations Council is made up of descendants of slaves. It is up to the black community, not to the white community, to decide who, how, and what within the stipulation of economic and educational renewal.
You said that America has an amoral, even a virulent strain of capitalism. So do you believe that America should do away with capitalism? If so, what does it look like?
No, I consider myself a capitalist. But I believe in capitalism with a conscience.
Can you explain to me why you consider yourself a capitalist, first of all, and then move on to what you're going to say?
Well, I am a capitalist. I'm a capitalist. But when I was growing up, the corporation was expected to care. So if somebody had worked for a corporation for decades, and then the corporation was expected, the social contract was such that the corporation was expected to care that that person who had worked at the company for decades would have a dignified retirement. Starting back in the 80s, with the whole trickle-down economic theory, the notion was introduced that the only responsibility of the corporation should be fiduciary responsibility to the stockholders, even at the expense of other stakeholders, at the expense of the worker, at the expense of the community, at the expense of the environment, expense of the planet, and that government with any kind of regulatory oversight should stay out. That's what I meant by a virulent form, virulent strain. So I'm not one of those people. There are people who believe that capitalism is inherently immoral. I don't actually.
Yeah, because most people, particularly a number of African-American scholars and people who focus on economy, the idea of capitalism is that someone has to be at the top and someone has to be at the bottom. But let me interject. Do you believe that could be capitalism without racism and inequality.
I do believe there can be capitalism without racism and inequality. I think that whether or not capitalism is exercised without racism and inequality doesn't have to do with the economic structure. It has to do with the consciousness of human beings. Now, we now have capitalist leaders such as Ray Dalio, Jeremy Grantham, and et cetera, who have acknowledged that it has become now mainly an agent for the accumulation of money in the hands of a very few. So that we have 1% of Americans who own more wealth than the bottom 90%. It must self-correct. And I'll tell you something, if it doesn't self-correct, it's not going to be about me. It's going to be a younger generation that's going to storm those Bastilles. But I know I would be a president, and we need a president who isn't going to broker any more of this nonsense. You can't have a government, a 2017 $2 trillion tax cut, $2 trillion, where 83 cents of every dollar went to the very richest individuals and the very richest corporations. Now that's just public policy, and there is so much of it, which actually makes it easier for the rich to get richer and harder for other people to even survive. Meanwhile, we have millions of American children who go to school hungry every day. We have millions of American children who go to school every day in classrooms that don't even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically diminished, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. That disparity, that needs to stop, and if I'm president, it will stop.
Question that a lot of our viewers would like to know is, why should Black people vote for you?
I wouldn't say that Black people should vote for me. That's not the way I'm looking at any of this. I think that all Americans should listen deeply to what everybody's saying, because this is a critically important election. I'm not trying to get anyone to do anything. I'm saying, this is my view. This is my view of what is. This is my view of what needs to change. You have this option for someone who looks at the issues this way and would do these things with the executive power. Whether or not you should vote for this is not for me to say.
Really? Because most people always ask for votes.
Well, that's because that's the way the game is played. I'm not playing that game. I'm trying to empower, not disempower. See, that's what's wrong with our politics today. They treat the voter like poker chips. It's all, I'll do this for you, I'll do that for you. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying together we can change this country. Even on the issue of reparations, I have this conversation about reparations in the whitest states in America. I talk about reparations in Iowa and New Hampshire and Wyoming and get massive applause, by the way. To me, reparations is an example. So this isn't a Black agenda for me. This is an American agenda. So I'm not playing that. I'm saying this is my view. And everybody, I believe there's something very profound about democracy. Something very profound about everybody should listen to all of the candidates because they're really good people. Think deeply, read up on the issues, and listen to your heart. Whoever you vote for, then whoever wins the most votes, that's called democracy. I'm just honored to be part of that process. There's something very profound about that, and I'm not trying to mess with it. I'm trying to serve it.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
All right. Appreciate it.